Public Administration Reform Conference 2024. My name is Rinor and I will be moderating this panel today, where we will discuss specifically about corruption, ethics, and culture in public administration. Corruption is generally a phenomenon which undermines public governance. There is a general perception that with power, corruption is also present, and we can see this from many cases of former or even current public officials which are facing corruption charges in different countries all over the world. What states have been doing in the recent decades or the recent years in actually response to this perception is establishment of rules that call for more accountability of public administration, transparency, and inclusion. Ethical standards or rules and public values have been established in almost all public administrations all over the world in order to prevent corruption as an important tool. But do these rules have actually an impact in preventing corruption? Is prevention of corruption a matter of rules, rule of law in general, or it depends also on the social, cultural context of particular countries, including also our country, Kosova? What are some of the good tools in preventing corruption in the public sector? So these are some of the questions that we will be discussing today in this panel specifically. And together with me, we have our esteemed guest from my right, Mr. Buleshkaj, who is the director of the Agency for Prevention of Corruption of the Republic of Kosovo. Then we have Madam Betania Lemos, who is the president of the National School for Public Administration, coming from Brazil. Welcome. And also Mr. Younes Abouyoub from the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, coming from the Kingdom of Morocco. Welcome to Kosovo. So I will start as a moderator with some introductory questions, and of course we have 1 hour here in total, and after the first round of questions you can join as well from the public with specific questions on the topics that we will be discussing. Maybe we can start with you, Mr. Younes. My question would be, what is the state of play of the prevention and fight against corruption in general? What are the actual trends all over the world in different countries, and what has basically the UN been promoting in the recent years in preventing and fighting corruption? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the government of Kosovo for organizing this event and welcoming us. This is the first time I visit Pristina, so I'm quite glad to be here. Well, to answer your question, at the international level, the major instrument that the UN has developed is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, called UNCAT, which was actually negotiated between 2002 and 2003 in Vienna and was adopted in October 2003. Back then, 140 countries were the signatories, and today, as of August 2024, we have 191 that endorsed it, which is a major development. If we count that the total membership of the United Nations is 193, so we're almost at universal coverage now. And this convention is basically the legal universal instrument that puts the framework, the legal framework for combating corruption around the globe. It's a major instrument in the sense that it does, through its different articles, help put mechanisms for cooperation among member states to fight corruption, and mostly focusing on asset recovery, which is a major issue in most countries, especially from the global south. As you know, corruption takes different types of forms, and most of the time, whether it's from the public service or the higher level of government, money that is usually embezzled from the public service never stays in the country, usually it goes outside, and it stays in banks So which means that in a way the global south countries are net exporters of capital to the north. And this is one of the things that this UN Convention has focused on. Now, in terms of status of implementation, that's a more challenging thing, because it's one thing to have articles and laws and rule of law as a framework. It's another to compel member states to implement it. And as you know, even if you have this membership of the UN, member states are sovereign countries. They decide what to do and what to implement and not implement. And most often than not, I would say that the issue with implementation of certain clause of this convention is political. It depends on what type of interest this country has towards that country, what type of political relationship they have. Let's imagine country A has a government that is authoritarian for many years, and there is either a coup or a change of government, and that country A's leader has money in country B, who supported that leader for many years. It will be very hard and challenging for the new government to come up with an agreement with country B to send back usually millions, if not billions of money that been embezzled. And I think that's something that even Transparency International has been working on through its different chapters around the world. So because with the UN we try to engage also NGOs and try to manage and have these assets recovered by countries. This is even key today. As you know, we have the Agenda 2030 for development, and one of to buttress this regulatory framework is the G16, exactly 16.6 as a goal and as a target. It focuses on the issue of corruption and asset recovery for countries to have domestic funding and financing their development. So corruption is closely related to issues of development, or I would say underdevelopment in the global south. And the challenge today is how to master and buttress the political will of member states to be more effective in first cooperating at the regional and international level, because if you don't do it at the international level, regional level, it's very hard for one single country to fight corruption, because it has transnational dimensions. And that's what the United Nations Convention Against Corruption is doing.
Thank you very much. So the second question would be for our second speaker, for Ms. Lemos. My question is, to which extent and how can ethical standards frameworks influence the concrete behavior of public servants? Is this a matter of rules, like the prevention of corruption? Is it a matter of rules, or generally the culture of administration or that country, the people living there, plays a role as well?
Thank you for the question, and thank you the government of Kosovo to invite me to be here. It's my first time also in Kosovo, in Pristina. This is a great question, like it because it brings a philosophical aspect. So it's quite a complex question, like our question of philosophical approach. In my opinion, both are true. The culture makes the rules, and the rules make the culture. They have a very close connection. What I mean is that culture shapes what we think. Then we write the rules according to what we think. And these rules will shape the next generation behaviors, and it becomes a culture somehow. When we talk about corruption, for example, for years it was not typified nor recognized as a crime. It was very usual practice to mix public and private money. However, people start to question this kind of behavior. Then, at the beginning of the 20th century, ethical standards and frameworks were built for public and private organizations to follow. And now it's become our culture, and UN incorporated it in the agreement, international agreement. So it's a good way to make a culture, to begin the culture against corruption. But there is something in this discussion that has intrigued me a lot nowadays. It is not classified as a crime yet. And those of us who thinking about public administration and make decisions should start thinking about laws and rules for another ethical problem. That is when this problem is when policymakers use their public position to benefit a specific group of people. And sometimes they don't even belong in this group. Not the corruption for take advantage in ourselves, but in benefit another group. I give you an example for highlight this. When a government extends taxes on luxury goods, for example, it benefits a small group of people that access this kind of goods, the rich people. But this is not a corruption like our definition of corruption nowadays. What happens to the other groups in the society as a consequence of this benefit or a specific group? They indirectly pay for these extent taxes. So when we have a reality in which policymakers' decision is imposed for most of the population and only a few parts of the population gain, we face a worrying ethical problems, and this is a philosophical problem, and this kind of decision generate losses equal to or even greater than traditional corruption like we understand corruption nowadays. Don't you agree?
Yes.
Yes. If so, if you agree, I invite you to think about how we who think public administration can build a governance system to avoid this kind of behavior of policymakers. And how could we build laws to name it, because it's not named nowadays. We say about inequality because it's generating inequality, but it's not named, not typified like a crime. So we need to think about it, to build this governance system, to typify and take a name to this kind of behavior and punish it. As set up last century for a traditional corruption that you know nowadays. Maybe one day we have an ONU with an international way to avoid this kind of behavior of public policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lemos. Now, like from the international level, we will speak about a bit about the national level. And as I said at the beginning, we have the director of the Agency for Prevention of Corruption here, Mr. Buleshkaj. And my specific question for him is about the national measures to prevent and fight corruption in Kosovo. So what are the specific legislative and implementing measures that are taking place? So what is important like for Kosovo to address seeing the current situation or the different events that happened throughout the recent years?
Thank you very much. Dear Ms. Lemos, dear Mr. Abouyoub, I'm very pleased to be among you in such a distinguished panel. Dear Mr. Hoxha, dear guests. First of all, it's not easy to go now from international standards to national standards, but I have to open my speech with quote of another friend of mine who quoted someone else. And he said that institutions like ours and like prosecutions are known only for cases that we didn't manage to prevent or to fight. So we are similar to goalkeepers. So goalkeeper can protect the goal from hundreds of goals, but they are members only for the goals that the other team managed to score. So it's not an easy job, and I think it was not even an easy job when Kosovo decided to create its own structure to prevent and fight corruption, which started sometime around 2006 and 2008 when the agency was established. At the similar time, Kosovo established also the specialized prosecution against corruption and economic crime. These two institutions are the crucial institutions that are also foreseen based on the income. You have one suppression institution, another one is preventive institution. Our agency was established with a law, with a broad mandate to prevent corruption by offering transparency, first of all, and also by preventing a possible conflict of interest among public officials, as well as channels for whistleblowing, which are crucial to have preventive measures in place. And another very important tool is the declaration of assets and interests of public officials. So we have now more than 15 years of experience in implementing, and then it came the time 2022 to update the legislation. It's the time that Kosovo filled in the complete mosaic of laws and other policies to prevent corruption and to investigate in an administrative sense. I'm not going to address a lot in the sense of criminal investigations, but rather administrative investigations that my agency is in charge to implement. So, first of all, I think the societies like Kosovo society their task is more complex and more difficult. We have a small society. According to the last census, in Kosovo lives about just a bit more than 1.5 million. So it's very easy to be in a situation of conflict of interest where basically almost everyone is cousin with someone else in their office. It's very difficult to work the mechanism of protection of whistleblowers where everyone knows everyone. And also it's very difficult, which is another side, to hide anything from your assets, from your neighbors, where every neighbor knows everything about them. So that was the positive side, whereas the first ones are more challenging. So that's why I think even our work was more successful in the sense of declaration of assets and gifts, because it was as a transparency tool actually to prevent corruption, and whereas the others tools like the tool of preventing the conflict of interest and whistleblower protection, they are more challenging because of specified things. In present, we have now 4 laws that regulate the preventive tools. It's the law on the Agency for Prevention of Corruption that foresees some of crucial elements to prevent corruption. The first one is to do the so-called anti-corruption proofing of legislation. The second one is to all institutions are obliged to have integrity plans in place as a tool of self-assessment about risks and mitigation measures to be taken in case that they face any such risk. Also, national anti-corruption strategy, which actually in present we don't have, but on the other side, I think the 4 years without a strategy were the most successful years of Kosovo in different international measurements against corruption, which is a very interesting, I think, case globally. But very soon we'll have also that tool. And on the top of that, we do also, which is also foreseen from international standards, to do measurements and assessments of risk in different sectors. I think with this through analysis, we also have a clear picture where Kosovo is heading and how Kosovo is doing. I think it's quite obvious if you look at different reports, not only local but also international. Kosovo is progressing steadily. But even if you see public opinions, some 5 to 10 years ago, corruption was among 3 to 4, top worries of public, and now it's around 10. Still, it's on the top 10, which is worrisome for us as public officials, but nevertheless, it shows the progress. On the other side, the conflict of interest remains a big challenge. Building capacities for this is also a big challenge, because you cannot have one institution in any country who can see and oversee every case of conflict of interest. We are building capacities together also with the support of KIPA, Kosovo Public Administration Institute, of the officials within the public service to identify this problem easier than earlier. And also we are trying to improve also the cooperation between government agencies to prevent and to fight corruption. I think our work is just one of the chains in the work against corruption. Maybe the first chain, preventive measures, but then it's police and prosecution who are very important tools, and we are trying to improve this collaboration, cooperation with them. And at the same time, we are trying to also include civil society as much as possible in the system. And this is also given as a power to the agency based on our legislation that I mentioned beforehand. Another big priority is to raise awareness about negative consequences of corruption among citizens. We believe that corruption is not only a problem to development in the development sense, but also in security sense. We are very familiar in this part of the world that corruption is used also for cross-border influences. So now it's seen also as security. Possible security breaches. For us, and I think for Kosovans, it's not that corruption is only a criminal violation, it's also malpractice on daily use. So this was also reflected in our legislation. Kosovo it lives in a part of the world that was governed for 5 centuries from Ottoman Empire, that had left their way of how the civil service works, where gifts are regular and very acceptable. Whereas now we are trying to build the culture of public officials that the gifts are not allowed, because the law doesn't allow gifts, but it's quite acceptable in everyday life that for a service that you receive from the government institutions, you feel obliged to give some kind of gift, no matter how big the gift is. So we're trying to stop that and to build a new culture. I think this Ottoman culture was also developed further with Yugoslav times, where again this was maintained the gift-giving practice that now can be either considered as bribery, to be, if you want to be soft, you can call it like gift-giving. So we are in that. So all this legislation are trying to kind of stop the the customary behavior in order for Kosovo to be ready and to be integrated either in Council of Europe. So our legislation and the policies of agency meet the standards of critical countries, or in line heavily with OECD Convention Against Bribery and other conventions, and also with UNGAP, of course. So it's three-part, how to say, like influence that was felt when our legislation was drafted, and also the local context that was built over the centuries. I want to just stress once more the importance that civil society has to be involved, because that's, I think, a direct way of getting citizens' sense when we draft policies. I think Kosovo is a good example in that sense. There is no law in Kosovo, there is no policy that I think there is no example where civil society was not part of drafting. I'm not talking here about consultation procedure, which is a must in the legislation, but even in the work groups to design the policies, civil society is involved. Maybe because we are lucky to have a very vibrant civil society and we are quite experienced in most of either in civil servant sense, but also in prevention of corruption, fighting corruption sense. So this is like the initial addressing. Thank you very much. And again, I'm very pleased to be in this panel.
Okay, super. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Like what can we definitely conclude from this part is that undoubtedly rules can change the culture of people, can change the culture of that society and even the public administration. I have some follow-up questions related to your presentations. Back to you, Mr. Younes. You presented very well the international framework on prevention and fight against corruption, and but the important are actually very important are actually the real tools to prevent and fight corruption. Some of them which were presented by Mr. Buleshkaj that Kosovo is implementing, and all this was achieved basically without any proper strategic framework planning, like a strategy in place, but as ad hoc tools where we actually saw that this is needed to be done. What would be some of the tools in your view that can effectively address corruption, but the tools that can actually apply to different social and organizational cultures in different countries?
Absolutely. I mean, there's one caveat that I should refer to is that when we talk about culture, I don't see the way, I don't use the word culture in an essentializing way. Because a culture is not something that is biological. It's something that is conditioned by history. And as such, these are sets of conditions that if you change them, then the culture changes. Because more often than not, I hear a lot of people talking about, well, this is cultural and then that's how it is. Or certain culture are doomed or prone to corruption and others are not. There's no angels and demons in this world, we all know it by now. You talked just a little while ago in your presentation about the issue of accepting gifts. Actually, you talked about the Ottoman. I think they call it Bartil or something like that. But just recently, there was a discussion just yesterday on the BBC. I heard it about the current Prime Minister of the UK. There's a whole issue about him accepting very expensive gifts, and he says that it's normal for him to accept it. And while there's a discussion now whether the elected people of the parliament should be accepting gifts like travels or nice clothes. So where do you start with this? Which leads me to the question of how do you define corruption? There are practices that could be legal, but they're not necessarily legitimate. A form of corruption could be when money invades politics, the lobbying process, private money into elections in big democracies. Would it be called corruption or not? Because if you receive as a donation millions of dollars for a campaign, who are you? Where does your interest lie at the end of the day when you are elected? Is it to those who gave you money or to the common? So we have to distinguish between what's legal and what is legitimate. In most of the cases, unfortunately, there are legal practices that nobody questions because they are not punishable by law. So to answer your question, fighting corruption should have a multifaceted approach. It is the set of values, but also at the same time a set of rules and regulations to fight impunity and to enforce accountability. At the end of the day, a public service or public administration is a way for humans to implement government policies for the service of the common good. And if you don't have what I would call a national integrity system that combines legal instruments with values, it will be very hard to to change the course of action. It is not enough to trust the humans to do the right thing, because humans are humans. And power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, as we all know. And once you get into power, then you tend to think that you're entitled to certain things. So I think one of the facets of this combat against corruption in all cultures should be, first of all, about ethics. And how to focus on ethics, at least I see four things. Personal morality, which are important. I mean, the ability of everybody to have a moral compass, to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. But as I said earlier, it is not enough to trust humans to do the right thing. So to do that, then you have the second category, what I call the professional ethics, which is a set of regulations that you put within any type of human organization to make sure that that moral compass would work. And the third one, I would call it organizational ethics, which is the ethos of an organization. It's the whole culture. I've worked in certain circumstances where with the change of the leadership, you could see that the whole culture could change. All of a sudden, it doesn't evolve around the institutional good, the institutional performance, but it revolves around one person. And all of a sudden, you move from an institutional behavior towards, well, the boss wants, the boss decided. And then once nobody, I saw earlier something, a graffiti says that, I think this morning in the presentation, the plenary actually, that you should raise your voice even if it shakes. And once those voices are not risen, then the tendency becomes that nobody challenges that status quo, and then it becomes a norm, and the norm becomes a social value, and then it's very hard to deconstruct at the end. As Martin Luther King used to say, it's not that there's a lot of bad people around the world, it's that there's a lot of indifferent people, and indifference makes these kind of problems very hard to do. Which leads me to the fourth set of what I would call social ethics, is how to work in the public service. Of course, nobody asking complete altruism from humans. There's always sort of personal. You do a career in the public service, you also expect to have a certain decent pay and decent living. But at the same time, it should not be your sole purpose. You should make sure, and the system should make sure, that there is an even balance between what is individual benefit, but what is the collective good. And once we change that culture, that when you enter public service, that you're there to serve the common good, I think social values and the ethos would change. Unfortunately, what I see around the world, and I worked in many countries, is that the last 20 years, because of neoliberal policies, values have changed. We are in a society that is more and more based on the image. And then the values are more about what is financial. So all of a sudden, certain behavior became norm, because if you think of what you see as heroes in TV, it's all about money and money. So it's very hard to suddenly convince somebody today, a young person, that if you enter the public services for the common good, then you should basically almost go for self-denial in that way. So not to go too much into it, what I would say, this is what I would call the educational and awareness-raising part. And the other part, of course, is what I would call the state. Then you have a set of regulations, strict laws that would combat impunity. As long as you don't have a real mechanism that are implementable and implemented to fight impunity and hold people accountable for what they did at the top, not always to go for the easier target, because that's the problem with punishment usually. It will be very hard when people don't see that there is real accountability and people pay for their actions, especially senior leadership. Then why would you ask someone at the low level to pay for what they did? Because they see the top level doing it. So in a nutshell, I would say that A good approach will focus on issues of transparency and open data that could help us. More citizen engagement so that people realize that this is all of us, the state is us. Collective action, integrity promotion, important. Anti-corruption strategy for each country is important in the sense that talking about issues of conflict of interest, for instance, that you mentioned. And I will close with one simple case that I saw. I worked in the Great Lakes region, two countries that are exactly similar in composition, in terms of ethnicity, social structure, and even regime before and after. They changed afterwards. I mean, I'm talking about Burundi or Rwanda. Same composition, Tutsi, Hutu. They went through genocide, but everything changed after the civil war, where one country reshuffled its whole culture, whole administration, strong national integrity system fighting corruption, and the other did not do that. So we see where Rwanda has achieved and where Burundi is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for answering in such comprehensive way to my question and for providing specific examples. I want to relate to one of the things that you mentioned on like different forms of corruption, or like how corruption is basically defined, and we see that there is a difference from one country to the other. And you mentioned the examples of private money going to political parties and to the elections, trying to influence or not, maybe, I don't know, like the future government. We see that happening in different countries of the world. So I would like to ask Ms. Lemos about this new concept of lobbying, which is something that is not regulated currently in Kosovo, but we see that happening all the time. There are some rules about the transparency on public finances of political parties, but still there are no specifics, such as in other countries, on regulating lobbying, who can actually be registered as a lobbyist, and the other details that would be important in such a context. Can you maybe bring an example from your country or the other countries that you might work about lobbying? Would that be something good for a small country like Kosovo? Is it important, also considering different links and that Mr. Buleshkaj mentioned before, and very strong family ties? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. I will bring two examples of two countries that address lobbying in an opposite way. One of them is the US, and the other is my country, the Brazil. In the case of the US, for example, they address the lobby too explicitly. So a certain deputy or a politician is elected, financed by a certain industry, and everyone knows what interests he will defend by voting for him. So in my country is the opposite. We adopt another model, which is, and other countries adopt the model that Brazil adopted, the one that prohibits lobbying. So lobbying is prohibited in Brazil. The prohibition ends up not avoiding the lobby, but causing it to be practiced without transparency or in distinguished way. In my opinion, it is impossible to prevent lobbying, because the democratic system is a politician system in which groups dispute and have to persuade each other. All social groups have their interests, and what is great about democracy is exactly choose which of the ideas benefit the majority, or at least that's how it is in theory of democracy. So the lobby is part of the convincing and of the democratic process. When society sees it as in the case of the US, that makes the explicit and regulated. The population has more element and information to decide the representatives in the political dispute that best fits the interest, and each one make this choice. We would have in theory the best choice for the majority of the society, but only in theory. I said in theory because in practice what we see is that the interest of the majority does not always prevail given the electoral process, and especially nowadays with social network and fake news. The second model adopted in Brazil prohibits lobbying. But what we see in practice is that it ends up occurring with other names, or in the other less explicit way, or if non-profit institution or organized civil society is used to make the lobby with legitimacy. And it's a very huge problem. So that's also a question. To summarize my answer, lobbying is natural in democracy. If we define it as a defense of the interests of different groups and interests that exist in our society, we are composed by different people from different ideas, from different historical and social structure. Some of these groups benefit the majority of the population, others only a small group and harm the majority. What we have to think about is how to create mechanisms to prevent laws that harm the majority of the population, promoted by specific social groups, from being implemented by the representatives of societies and become laws or administrative procedures. This is a quite challenge, very quite challenge, and we need to face it. And I think there doesn't exist a specific answer that addresses the best model for each town. We need to find it.
Thank you very much for sharing these examples. And my final question before we open to the public for questions would be for Mr. Buleshkaj, who actually shortly, and then we will open to the public.
Thank you very much. Lobbying is a very complex issue, first of all, but it can, it's a perception that it can contribute to prevention of corruption. First of all, we have the two models. I cannot add anything. One of models is perceived as was the way, or another way is a way how to make the corruption more visible. Connection, and the other one, the European model of living, and the one most probably Brazil uses, it's more of a system that makes more transparent the work of lobbyists. Because we believe that even today we have lobbyists who work in Kosova, but there is no register where they would disclose their activities, and then we could track after if the decisions of government are influenced from this kind of transactions between lobbyists and political parties. So we treat in present from two classes. First is CEC, Central Election Commission, who sees that as donation, way of donating to parties, and then for us is to investigate possibilities of relationship in between donations and policy decisions of either parliamentarians or government. It's very complex. So we are, I believe we are in a good path to decide what model would be more suitable to us. For next year, I'm quite sure that we won't have in the program to have a law on regulating the lobbyists. Nevertheless, I think it's, first of all, it's something that Kosovo will have to do if we want to go towards EU path. This is one of the requirements. So we will have to decide what model is suitable to us to regulate that. But the law or whatever policy we will have, it will have to be having in mind risking the undue influence of the politics of the country. This will be most probably, again, it will continue to be partisan work of agency and CAC. That's to document the transaction or the relationship. Countries of the region that have this legislation in place are not substantial, known for being very successful after implementing this policy. So it's not very encouraging for our government, I think, to move towards that way. Lobbyists are registered, but then the investigations are done from agencies like ours to produce a very substantial result. But for sure we will have to do introduce some kind of lobbying regulation. So this is more or less what is the current situation. I mean, we have to be very frank. We have every one of us who has a Facebook account can see our members of parliament going to a number of visits of the country that are funded from sources that are not either reported as donations to political parties, or they are not reported even as gifts to them. And they are not paid either from political party or from members of parliament or from any other government official. So this is a part of the grey zone that we need to regulate, no matter how we do it. We try to influence as much as possible and to make public officials, but also other officials, at least to report that as either donation or as gift. So then we can track if that is any kind of influence or influence in their policy making. But it's not going very smoothly. Because if it's not even the times when we have laws in place, it's not very easy to implement them, at least on the first years, and especially in the time that we don't have any legal provisions. But we are trying to do something. So at least we are perceived as someone who's watching the process. Personally, I believe that we will take some model that doesn't underestimate corruption through calling it lobbying. Because in that sense, it will make the work of prevention agency and other bodies very, very difficult.
Okay, thank you. So, in your opinion, like it's still early in Kosovo, like having a law like this, and this actually is it comes from the fact that not so many laws are being implemented strictly in Kosovo. So at the end of the day, for like big companies or like people who have interests, like it's not a priority to actually change the laws because they are not, some of them at least are not implemented. Once we become more strict in implementation, I think lobbying would be a more priority topic to be addressed by the government. Okay, so we have still 10 minutes until the end of this panel, and we will open to the public. If anyone has a question, please, Mr. You first. Microphone, yes.
Sorry. Yes, okay. Thank you very much. Pierre from France. I've been listening to you, and I would like to be maybe a bit provocative. I think we could be here forever talking about how to make a corruption-free world. I'm an academic, that gives me a good job, self-retirement. But I'm an academic in management. So why not think it differently? Instead of fighting corruption, to make integrity interesting. In other words, people are people. Who am I to tell you that it is right, this is wrong? We have here a title, ethics, probably ethics. It's a very hot topic, eternal topic. morality and things. Who am I to teach? How am I to judge? I don't know. Apart from stealing, killing, basic things, okay, related to the survival of human race. So, on the other hand, I view things as a policy, change management, how to make people change. They change not by avoiding of being killed, but by looking for a benefit. And if you want to play a game, whatever it is, commercial, political, well, these are our rules. If you want to enter the game and be partner, you abide by the rules we have agreed upon. If not, well, it's your choice to be somewhere else. Because if we go head-on, ethics versus ethics, etc., well, we have what we have nowadays. It's not my fault, it's culture shock. You don't understand. So, end result, 0. So, this is kind of at least a common question. Well, how to change, to introduce change management through showing the benefit of, I would say, big word, integrity. In other words, play our game. It's good for you, but if you don't want to play, you don't abide by the rules, well, you're out, and that's your problem.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can take a couple of more questions and then we will do a round of answers. The gentleman behind, I think, or the lady, yes please. Ladies first, and then the gentleman behind.
Okay, apologies. I grabbed the mic before you could get it. Okay, so I'm Randir. I'm from the University of Westminster in London. Really, as you say, an interesting debate. Just 2 quick things then. What about point of entry? When we select public servants, could we give them some kind of integrity test? I don't know, just something about who we let into the system. Secondly, about whistleblowing. What are your thoughts about in terms of whistleblowing policies and safeguarding whistleblowers? For example, in the UK, we have a very active case going on now about the Horizons post office scandal. And we have the Lucy Letby case and people who were reporting, the nurse that is imprisoned for killing children, but people were saying, but we were reporting this, and there was nothing we could, nobody would listen to us or whatever it was. So, who we let in and whistleblowing, please.
And the gentleman?
Yes, thank you. You mentioned the examples of Rwanda and Burundi, and I think it's in developing countries, which Kosovo is not in the sense of African countries, it's not a developing country as such, but there I think you see that it's a question of life and death, that if you have a country that has a sound system without that much corruption, it can thrive, whereas when you look at Burundi, it's the poorest country in the world, I think. So I can't help but mention an anecdote you were mentioning the export of assets in Uganda, which is the neighboring country there, where they started enforcing this reporting of assets and unexplained wealth. The president, who has been in power for 40-some years, I think, he said that, yeah, that's a good idea, but don't do it too hard, because if you do it too hard, then they will escape with the assets. So anyway, but also in terms of I'll continue with the example of Uganda, because it's the corruption, of course, there is prevalent, and you can see it. Everyone knows it. It's everywhere, but you don't see big prosecutions. Okay, you see, and the title of the panel, you see that there's a focus on the culture and ethics and so on. But I'd like to ask your question about the kind of the flip side of the coin, the kind of the hardcore element in terms of the grand corruption, which is I love that word, grand corruption, but the just plain embezzlement of public assets and the prosecution of those individuals, the sequestration of assets. What kind of role do you see the criminal justice chain playing in this fight against corruption? Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe one more final question. Okay, so 2 more questions, but I'll bet with the time. So it's a very interesting discussion for 1 hour, but still, if you can ask you to be short and precise. Thank you.
Përshëndetje, një pyetje për zotin Buleshkaj. A konsideroni që konflikti i interesit është hapi I parë drejt korrupsionit, pasi që në pozita të caktuara emërohen njerëz, individ, e që më pastaj të lidhje strukturore krijojnë rrjetin korruptiv brenda një institucioni publik. Dhe së dyti, cilat janë hapat dhe veprimet që kanë ndërmarrë agencioni për parandalimin e korrupsionit nga konteksti I luftimit konfliktit të interesit. Faleminderit që zëmërësiq.
And the lady behind for the final question.
You mentioned corruption as a transborder or with transborder effects. First question, is there any regional cooperation, especially between the anti-corruption agencies? Sometimes there are different names. And another question, what would be your recommendation to address one main criticism in the region, including Kosovo, which is the lack of adjudication of so-called high-profile cases? Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the questions. I think we have to separate the questions because of the time. I will firstly pass the 2 questions about making the integrity interesting. That was asked by the gentleman, and how to change basically the people and the management. And also the direct question that was about the conflict of interest to Mr. Buleshkaj. And then we can pass to Mr. Younes about, I would like to hear his answers about the big fishes like grand corruption and how to actually adjudicate that and how important is that for the society. And also Mr. Lemos to conclude about integrity testing or whistleblowing, like when as a criteria for entering public administration. Mr. Buleshkaj, please.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be as brief as possible. I think it's possible to make it interesting, but we need at least 3 programs or 3 elements in a good environment. First of all, we need a combination of trade. So we need a training program, education program, and mentorship programs. Training would develop necessary skills of officials to identify and prevent corruption. Education programs can raise awareness about ethical principles of good governance. And mentorship programs, so young public servants would be helped to develop and to maintain these skills. But as one was mentioned from the gentleman, I think we need all this cannot function unless we have a positive working environment that rewards ethical behavior and punishes misconduct. So I think this brings back to the importance of the head of institution or head of state, being the role model. We have a say here that say that fish is rotten from the head, it starts to be rotten from the head. So if the head is rotten, then you cannot expect much from the other parts. So I think we can include transparency in recruitment and promotion procedures to be merit-based in order to make the ethical behavior more attractive and for the public servants. So this is, I think, what we should have in mind. Is it easy? It's not easy, of course. And then if I go back to the direct question, we need also regional cooperation, we need regional experiences. Something that worked in France may work in Kosovo, for example. Or something that worked in Estonia, because of the size of countries and the size of population, may work in Kosovo better than something that worked in the US, especially regarding whistleblowers and their motivation with financial means to be a whistleblower. In Kosovo, I don't think that we have the benefit of giving this to the officials who become whistleblowers. Then, what do we do with conflict of interest? It's not, I think the start is not conflict of interest. It's more the criminal mindset. So when you start recruitment, then you would start to having in mind. So this kind of goes against what I said before. We need to have transparent and merit-based recruitment. If we have transparent and merit-based, then we may have chances to succeed. If starting from recruitment, we have in mind to have people who listen to us, then we could use in the future. This is not called conflict of interest. This is something totally wrong. It's something that needs to be dealt through prosecution. And what do? We try to train as much as possible. For example, all institutions have a designated official who is trained regularly once a year from us or when they are appointed in basics how to identify and deal with conflict of interest. Is this enough? I don't think so. As long as we have every week 10 to 20 cases for interpretation of conflict of interest, it means that we are not successful in preventing it within institutions. Our goal is institutions to have their own capacity to deal internally with potential of conflict of interest. So, first, integrity of institution is preserved, the trust in institution is preserved, and we can implement. So we deal only with more complex cases as an agency, because at the end of the day we are ending up doing things that are very obvious. Especially, we have even cases that come from University of Pristina from a law faculty. Lawyers here are better, I believe they should be better than our lawyers. So, university professors, they could easily, I think, implement the law of conflict of interest, but because of, I don't want to call it laziness, or they don't want to have problems with their colleagues, they don't decide internally, but they want to send to an external body to decide about conflict of interest, which is, I think, is self-critique. It's not for university or for agencies, for all civil society. We have to have in mind that as leaders, as lawyers, we should take our responsibility and decide and deal with cases internally. So as long as the law is respected, we will be very happy that all the cases are dealt with in institutions and no one from public knows about it and the integrity is preserved. We are making also some public awareness campaigns about what is conflict of interest, but the results are not great. I'm telling that openly. We need more resources, but I think there won't be any success as long as all institutions take their responsibility on their hands.
Well, thank you for the question on what we call the grand corruption. That's what I tried to mention, that it's not enough to go after petty corruption and leave the big fish, because the problem is with this type of corruption, which a lot of time can be disguised as legal, as financial commissions, and it's very hard to fight. I agree, because then this needs a cooperation at the regional and international level. It needs political will, which is most of the time not there, because states have different interests that go beyond this issue of ethics. And fighting corruption at that level, I'm not saying it's impossible, I say it's hard. It's almost reminds me of the same debate about global warming and pollution. They will tell you, change your bulb, use this type of bulb at home and not that, but actually that's not what creates global warming. You leave big, huge fossil fuel industries that make billions, and we focus on those small things. So we give the impression that you're fighting a phenomenon, but actually you're not fighting that phenomenon. So I wish I had a magic solution to this. It's really very difficult, because at the end of the day, human beings have not succeeded to create a system where we live together, whether at the national level or international level, that is not based on power. We're still stuck in this old tradition that is all power based and not right based. Even we have all these legal instruments and laws, and it's all about power, which leads me to the comments by the gentleman who talked about the issue. You said who are we to tell people or not? This is very postmodernist in a way. That's everything is relative. I don't think everything is relative. I think there are values. There is right and wrong. And at the end of the day, if I want to be also counter-provocative, if we don't believe that there is any right and wrong and everything is relative, you say that we can find incentives. We find incentives for people to join the game, but who is we? Then in that case, is it the collective we? Or is it those who hold power? And in that case, those who hold power, the incentives will go in the opposite direction. Because we see it all the time. You have people in the opposition, for instance, claiming to clean the system, and they're not part of the system, and this and that. And as soon as they join that club, they switch. So that we is the incentive, unfortunately. It's a big, complicated question. The lady who asked about the whistleblowing, I think one of the major instruments to fight corruption is whistleblowing, but it's also the hardest one. Because most of the time, you don't have the protection that will protect those people. Most of the time, they end up paying high prices for what they did. And once other people see that that whistleblower is not protected, they will not come forward. And this, we saw it at the national level, but we see it a lot at international levels. I don't want to name particular people, but it's obvious what I'm referring to. At the end of the day, fighting corruption cannot be done single-handedly. We have a tendency to think that a lot of countries, developing countries, are very corrupt because they're poor. I don't think it's poverty that leads to corruption. It's not. I think when people realize and see that the system works for certain people, not others, for a very small elite, where you have exceptions to the rules, why would they abide by the rules then, if the big fish do not? So it's not because you're poor that you're corrupt. Actually, most of the time it's because you're rich that you're corrupt. And that's, once we find a system that avoids the private money into public systems, I don't think we'll be out of this conundrum. And only focusing on the moral values, which are important, again, we need to find a system that combines these two approaches. As long as you don't have check and balances that really works for the collective good, and you have these loopholes in the law that only applies to the weak, I don't think we'll get there. Thank you.
I will be short because of the time. I will focus on the education process. Before we establish the education focus on corruption, the country needs to define what they think is corruption. We have laws, we have the international agreement, but we have the specific decision that the country needs to make. They need to train the public service to combat the corruption, and they need to define how the way they will combat it. After that, after its definition is made, so you need to train, because the public servants are people who are disseminating it in the society and who are the best individual to avoid the corruption in the government. So I think the public administration and the education of public administration is the key for avoid and combat the corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much from all the panelists and from the public. I actually took note here of some of the key words from this panel, and you can actually draw some conclusions, I would say. So the first conclusion is that the rules are important, and the rules on preventing or fighting corruption can definitely change and affect the culture of that society. And with these rules or the tools like administrative investigation or even criminal investigation or all the other tools on preventing corruption, such as declaration of assets, conflict of interest, all the topics that we discussed are important, but they are not enough. I like very much the phrase that was mentioned by Mr. Younes when he said that we need a national integrity system, and that would be a combination of rules and also moral values which have to be taught, and people should be educated on them rather than having rules imposed on them. For the lobbying part, the conclusion would be that we have different examples, like in different countries. Rules are needed for the lobbying, which is like a perception of corruption, as was mentioned, but the rules should be carefully introduced. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for taking a bit longer. I think the coffee break is still on there, and in this room there will be panel number 9 after the coffee break, Reform and Innovation in Public Sector. Thank you again.